characteristics of our time. The University of Maryland is doing work in this area in myriad ways, through research and teaching a pipeline of future talent who will design computer systems, manage data, fight crime and terrorism, and develop cutting-edge public policy. But an equally important aspect of cybersecurity is the role journalists play in covering this complex subject in a comprehensive, authoritative way. Over the past several years, Merrill College has identified cybersecurity as an area where our location in the Washington metro area, surrounded by researchers and policy specialists in other colleges at the university, provide us with an opportunity to provide curriculum, programming, and research related to cybersecurity. We are particularly pleased today that our Senior Vice President and Provost, Dr. Marianne Rankin, has joined us. Marianne, wave a little bit. Thank you. We're so glad to have you here. We have 3 experts in this area today who will give us a well-sourced, fact-checked assessment of the challenges facing our country and the world. First, our moderator today is Dana Priest, who joined Merrill College as the 3rd John S. and James L. Knight Chair of Public Affairs Journalism in the fall of 2014. Dana is also an investigative reporter for the Washington Post and a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner. She has spent the majority of her career focusing on national security, military operations, and the U.S. intelligence agencies. She uncovered secret CIA prisons in Eastern Europe and deplorable conditions for veterans at Walter Reed Medical Hospital. As a faculty member at Merrill, Dana focuses on global security issues in a digital world. Her student-led Press Uncuffed project successfully focused attention on the plight of journalists who are jailed around the world. Ted Koppel is best known as the anchor of Nightline for the program's inception in 1980 until 2005. Originally a newscaster for WABC Radio, he switched to television reporting while covering the Vietnam War. He is known for his consistently knowledgeable and sometimes piercing interviews. Nightline, the distinguished late-night news show, ran for 25 years, with Ted as its chief anchor. Since that time, he has worked for a variety of news outlets, including Discovery and the New York Times as an editorial contributing columnist. In the last year or so, he has been on an extensive tour to promote his latest book, Lights Out, a Cyberattack, A Nation Unprepared. And it's important to note that his former executive producer at Nightline, Tom Battaglia, is now the Eleanor Merrill Distinguished Visiting Professor of Broadcast News at Merrill College, and he is serving as our producer today. Keith Alexander, retired General Keith Alexander, served as the commander of the U.S. Cyber Command and the director of national security at Fort Meade until his retirement in 2014. As commander of U.S. Cyber Command, he was responsible for planning, coordinating, and conducting operations and defense at the Department of Defense. As the director of NSA and chief of the Central Security Service, he was responsible for the Department of Defense agency with national foreign intelligence, combat support, and U.S. national security information system protection responsibilities. You know, I had just gotten used to all the acronyms at a university, and to deal with the ones for the Army is a little overwhelming as well. He entered active duty after graduating from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Since graduating, he's also earned master's degrees in business administration, electronic warfare, physics, and national security strategy. Today, General Alexander is the CEO and president at IronNet Cybersecurity. Just to let you know, if it's not obvious, today's program is being live streamed and broadcast. Dana, the program is yours.
Thank you all for joining us, and we're going to start talk with one another for a while and then open it up for questions. We really would like you to ask tough, penetrating questions, because how many times do you actually have people like this to ask those questions of, and journalists to make sure they answer those questions. but I get to start, which is I'm going to start with what is current in the news, because it's pretty amazing what's current in the news about cyber information warfare and the Russians and the elections. So I'd like both of you to give us your views of what the Russians are up to. Are we seeing something different than you've seen them act towards us before? And what do you think the responses should be? General Alexander?
Dang. So I'll give you my thoughts. First, nations collect information to help guide their policymakers. Collecting information on what candidates for senior public office has gone on around the world for years. Senator McCain, when I was getting confirmed for Cyber Command, asked me why the Chinese were all over his network. And the answer was they wanted to know your position. So collecting information to help policymakers understand is something all countries do. Where this runs afoul is when those countries try to change and push back and get a populace to go a different way. So I think the collection of information, my assessment is it was against all the candidates, all the key candidates. The issue that we now face is what was done to potentially change the outcome of the election. Two things I think we need to do. First, we need to secure our infrastructure so that we can prevent that from happening. And second, I think it's our government's responsibility to push back on it. Now, they have a choice. The President, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council has a choice of how they do that. My experience in sitting in a number of those discussions is both sides, whether it was the Republicans or the Democrats, have a real good process for walking through the options, what the impact of those options would be, short-term and long-term, and then the right course of action to take. Seldom would that be put in the press for obvious reasons. My experience, though, is they would take action. And what that would be, I can't guess. But it would cover a whole range from diplomatic, the President or Secretary of State reaching out to Putin, all the way through different elements of national power. So we don't like what happened. I think everybody would say this is wrong. And the real issue, it kind of gets back to some of the things that Ted and I have worked on before. If you don't like it, fix the basic problem, and that is that we don't have a defensible strategy, period. And there is a lot that needs to be done to fix that. And increasingly, our wealth, our intellectual property, our secrets are on this network, and our future, and our power grid, lights out, bedtime.
What would you have done if you'd been still not only at Cyber Command, but let's say you had the power to decide how to respond to the Russians?
Well, so first, I think first we should set up a defensible architecture. So let's start with that. Now, granted, you can't do that overnight, but you need a defensible architecture that says, how do I operate in cyberspace so that going after someone is much more difficult than it is today? So the tools have to be there. Mm-hmm. Our nation needs to push that forward. Second, what's the role of government and what's the role of industry? They need to work together. For too long, we've pushed these apart as if industry should protect itself from cyber attacks and the government would be over here. Industry cannot protect itself from a nation-state actor. And so what you have is nation-state actors going after industry, whether it's here in Saudi Arabia or elsewhere. We need government and industry to have a way of communicating so they can come up with a defensible architecture at network speed. We have to have the roles of government understood by all the players and their missions and tasks laid out so that they can actually do that. And we should practice that. And I think, one of the great things that Ted has in his book is just that. How do we rehearse for what we see coming? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not getting, I don't think, am I getting a profit off of our book? No, I'm not. So
It's in paperback now, it's not even
so
worth
not-
it.
not
so-
worth it. But you know, when you look at it, it hits some really key points. When you think about what's going on, we don't practice it. We aren't ready. We assume that everything is okay until it's not. And what the government's responsibility is to look out and say, this is an unacceptable risk for our country. You know, the political thing is embarrassing. We're mad. It would be a lot worse if it were the energy sector, the financial sector, or our government. All of that's at risk. And so what we're seeing is something that makes us mad. What about something that impacts our way of life? And we're not addressing that. We are walking by hoping that nothing happens. That will not work. We have to stand up and fix this problem.
Okay. Ted, can you give us your analysis of what you've seen vis-a-vis the Russians, and also just pretend for a minute that you're General Alexander plus the president, and what would you do with the, what would you do? What do you think is a proper response?
Well, let me first of all give us a functioning headline here.
Okay.
And I think what we need to understand, and I believe General Alexander will agree with this, is that the internet has become a weapon of mass destruction. It has the potential to be used in ways we haven't even begun to understand. It is already being used across a wide arena of different areas. And what you're talking about is one tiny little area. You're a better investigative reporter than I ever was, and General Alexander has far more experience in this field than I've ever had, but I'm here because I'm older than both of you. and I remember that the United States, back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and I'm sure to this day, was very active in interfering in the elections of sovereign nations, particularly in places like Central America. It ill behooves us to act offended by the fact that the Russians are screwing around with our electoral process. What has changed is that the tools available to the Russians today are infinitely more effective than the tools that were available to the CIA back in the 1950s. So first we have to understand what can be done, and then we also have to understand, and in some respects, this is the larger question that you've put before me now in my new role as President, Head of NSA, what else?
Cyber-czar. Yep.
Cyber-czar. The first question that's going to be asked of the intelligence community by the president is, who the hell is doing this? Now, in this particular instance, it appears that 17 of our intelligence agencies were in agreement that it was the Russians. The Kremlin, Putin, somebody way down the pecking order. I'm not altogether clear, but I got the impression that somehow the Russian government was responsible for this. Now the question becomes, A, can I respond? Answer, of course you can. B, how do I respond? Do I want to punish the enemy for doing, and in this case, or adversary if you prefer? Yes, I want to make him think very carefully about not doing this again in the future. Well, Mr. President, I say in my role as policy advisor, got to be careful, because if we escalate too far, they're probably going to respond. And before you know it, you're in a massive cyber escalation, which can lead to very, very dangerous places indeed. Do you want to punish the adversary just to a point that he doesn't do it again? Yeah, that's
So
ideal.
what would be the range of options for that?
Well, the range of options can be anything from public embarrassment to imposing economic sanctions to revealing information about, let's say, President Putin that he doesn't want to have revealed. I'm sure that
What happened to his shirt?
What happened to his what?
His shirt.
His shirt.
The shirt. It disintegrated in the...
So yeah, I mean, there are tons of options, but the two great dangers that we're talking about here is it's not always that easy to identify who did it to you. The fact that so many of our intelligence agencies were in agreement about the Russians messing around with the Democratic National Committee and revealing all kinds of embarrassing emails, I would suggest that's more rare than common. Much of the time, at least initially, we don't know who did it. Is that a fair statement?
I think we're getting better at attribution. I think it is hard, but I think actually that was in 2005, one of the big issues that we faced and something that they focused a lot of effort and time on. So I think it is getting better. I think one of the things that you bring up that would be very useful to put on the table is the fact that this is one of many things that are going to happen, and across the full spectrum. You've got, in this case, an adversary where deterrence is something that can and probably should be used. But you have other actors out there who can't be deterred. As a consequence, you come back to the base case of fix cybersecurity and practice and be prepared. And I think, we haven't done that. So what we should learn is if this is embarrassing, it's going to happen a lot, go fix it.
Do you think we can actually get to a point where we're what percent secure? You're focusing on the defense, so how secure can our systems be? 100%? 50%?
I think we can do, what you want to do is enough so they can't come after you in a way that cripples the nation. And, I think one of the great opportunities was working with Ted and watching how he developed that book on Lights Out and the impact that that could have, one sector. When you think about it, what you get to is fix that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you? Absolutely. Is it going to take time? Yes. But there are technologies and ways to fix that. In fact, one of the things that, being here at the university, what I would turn to the audience and say, think about this. We're training students on how to communicate and how to secure those communications. There are ways to do this. We should train now, practice, rehearse. Part of that is to have industry tell government when something bad's going on at network speed. We can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can't do that today.
Not only can we not do that, but last year the Senate finally, after years of industry obstruction, and when I'm talking about industry obstruction, I'm talking about the electric power industry in particular, the Senate finally passed a bill which, on the face of it, reaches agreement between government and the electric power industry that if the electric power industry thinks it's being hacked, that they will pass that information on to the government. A couple of problems with that. The bill gives industry the right to scrub the information for privacy concerns. Why does the industry care about privacy concerns? Well, there's competition. And they don't want to be in a position of revealing something, not to the enemy, revealing something to other electric power companies out there. So they have the right to scrub the information. That takes time. Then, to whom do they give the information? Not to the NSA, which is clearly the most competent organization to deal with a potential cyber attack. They give it to the Department of Homeland Security. which is a fiasco and is not competent to deal with the issue and is not capable of responding or defending the electric power industry. The Department of Homeland Security then gets to further scrub the information. All of this takes time. Only then, after the industry has scrubbed it, after the Department of Homeland Security has scrubbed it, do they finally pass it over to the NSA. By this time, we're dealing with cyber security. We're dealing with information that is moving at the speed of light. And you're taking days, maybe weeks, to scrub this information. So, when General Alexander talks about the capability of being able to defend ourselves against these kinds of attacks, I have to defer to his expertise, but I'm a skeptic. I don't believe it. I don't believe it because I don't believe the industry is going to give you that kind of cooperation.
So I think we're talking the difference between technically, can we do it, and policy-wise, can we get it done? I think, I would go back to a very important statement that I would have made, but Ted made it, which is a weapon of mass destruction. It will be, it has been, it will be, and it will continue to be used against our country and others. It's growing, people are getting more capable, and this is just now a matter of time before something really bad happens. We should put that on the table and say, okay, we know that's going to happen. Now, what are we going to do to fix it? And, take all the, people are, I want this mission or I want this, and say, how do we do it? First, technically, let's put a technical solution on the table. And then say, there's how to defend it. Then the policymaker should say, okay, what do we need to do, for civil liberties, privacy, everything else, but how do we defend this country? It's interesting, and you both have much more investigative work than I have, but if you think about the aircraft, the aircraft carrier, both of those were thought to be not weapons of war, right? When they were first designed, people said, well, how could you possibly use these for warfare? And then when they found out, all the way through Pearl Harbor, everybody said, okay, we got it. This can be really bad. And what we're doing now with cyber is people saying, well, what could it be? I mean, I got Twitter, I got all these things. How bad could it be? And the answer is really bad.
As a outsider, one of the reasons I think that you have and the government failed to convince people of that does have to do with excessive secrecy. And there hasn't been a willingness yet to really let people in enough to say, this isn't just us wanting a bigger budget, it's actually happening. So knowing everything you know, do you think the government is ever going to actually, make a case that people can understand and grasp?
If I may, Dana, let me just jump in with a quick thought. It's not so much government. It's our system. Tom Ridge, who was the first Secretary of Homeland Security, told me that ours is a reactive culture. We wait until disaster strikes. We wait until Pearl Harbor, 75 years ago tomorrow. Right? Yep. We wait until 9/11. And then we expend $3 trillion in fighting a war in Iraq and fighting a war in Afghanistan. Then nothing is too big, nothing is too expensive, nothing is too outrageous. But in advance of that, try to convince the U.S. Congress these days that they need to spend, what are they going to have to spend, Keith? $100 billion?
Well, I think
trillion?
this is where actually it's a joint government industry problem. And my experience in dealing with industry is they want help. I mean, even the big banks and all these that I talk to, they want help. The problem is if they go fix it, they're not going to be able to fix it enough to really get a defensible architecture. So it's almost like, a big bank will be beat up if they get hacked, but they know that a nation state can hack them, even if they get that. So what you run into is we got to solve that problem, the policy problem. And I think I agree with everything Ted said. I would add to that, as you're thinking about it, what we have to have, and we actually put this out in the commission report, is you need a national public-private partnership where industry players can be briefed on classified information and know what's coming at them. It's been used effectively in the past to change what's going on and to adjust and fix systems with industry paying the lion's share of it. I've had personal experience with that. So I think this would be a good step, and set it up by industry and start that discussion.
You have that already. I mean, the banking system has, and you're part of that, right?
Well, I would take it one step further. So get them, so for example, the CEOs and the CISOs, the cybersecurity folks at these, bring them in and give them a briefing on what they're really facing. They see a small piece of what's happening. The government sees a big part. You bring that up and you're right. The problem is if the government shares all that with them publicly, then the government will lose the access on that visibility and our nation's hurt. So you have to have a way of sharing the information to a small population that can say the threat is real and we need to act. We have to do something like that. I think the FSI-SAC, these information sharing advisory councils for cybersecurity is a step in the right direction, but not nearly powerful enough. I think rehearsing it is really important. People talk by each other in this area. Defense in one group means something different than another. And we have to get that well understood. What are we talking about? You know, I think that's one of the key issues when you think about it. People say, well, in my mind, defense is incident response. We say, well, you know, I think, oh, well, everybody died here. You know, that's not defense. That's kind of after. It's the National Transportation Safety Board is after the crash. We want before the crash, especially if we're going to fly, right? I'm just thinking out loud. And so in cyber, the companies want the government to help them prevent an attack, not tell them what happened after an attack.
I think we also need to make the point, Dana, that unlike any other kind of threat that has confronted this country in our history, we're talking about something now that is not limited to nation states. Yes, the Russians are probably the biggest cyber threat out there. The Chinese, at least as big, maybe even bigger. The Iranians have a pretty good cyber warfare capability, as do the North Koreans, as do the Syrians. Now, in each of those cases, you're talking about a nation state. With nation states, most of the time, certainly with the Russians, certainly with the Chinese, at least you have a broad collection of interlocking interests. The Chinese don't want to totally blow up their relationship with the United States. They don't want to blow up all the economic relationships. We don't want to blow them up. Neither do the Russians. North Koreans, now you're getting into more dangerous territory. All everybody is talking about these days is the danger of North Korea as a nuclear threat. The North Koreans are also dangerous as a cyber threat. But the internet enables individual organizations, hacktivists. It enables terrorist organizations to threaten the welfare of the United States in a fashion that no individual has previously been able to exercise. We've got to start talking about that. We've got to start thinking about that. We are in the middle of a process right now, and we're talking about what I guess will be referred to as Pizzagate, right? We've got this pizza restaurant down on Connecticut Avenue that has been trolled over the past
Couple weeks.
several months. Right? And yesterday, some idiot, or the day before yesterday, some idiot went in there with a semi-automatic weapon, and fortunately, nobody was hurt. But we're talking here about something that can affect thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. I mean, actions like this, charges that have absolutely no relationship to fact or truth, are being leveled by the millions every day. You don't think that has the capability of undermining who we are and what we are in this country? It's just as dangerous as a bomb. But it's, go ahead.
No, absolutely, and I think, you know, all the journalist students here are so interested to know, you know, what is their life going to be like, their career in terms of competing with fake news. And my question is, does the government have any role or any responsibility in the area of fake news? Not to create it, but to
Sure.
identify it, regulate it, anything?
Well, you know, it's a great point, and you two are probably better equipped to answer that. I'll give you some thoughts, though, on the broader spectrum. What Ted has put on the table is the fact that the internet and the Internet of Things combined is going to change the way we operate today. For the good, and it's going to have some bad parts to it. And the bad parts, as a country, we need to stand together and say, what do we choose, and get on with it. For the defense of it, you know, the Constitution, I pulled this out, so, you know, when I was making an argument on the commission, I said, no, it's for the common defense. That's what we built this government for. And you look at, you know, Article 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you look at what the role of Congress, the President, the courts, and the states are, and you lay these out, the government's there for the good of the people, to ensure our welfare, our future. And it's in this area as well. It's not necessarily to overregulate, but it is to ensure it. So when I think about that, what we have not done is looked at how to do that, in part because it's technically challenging. There are different options. Everybody comes up with something. But now it's gotten to a weapon of mass destruction, and we're still wondering what to do. And, you know, as the greatest country in the world, we are going to attract people to attack parts of our country. It's going to happen, like what happened in Saudi Arabia a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get hurt by it. And it's going to get to a point where something gets so big that we're going to go fix it. We shouldn't have to learn like that. We shouldn't have to do that.
We're also, Keith, more vulnerable than any country in the world. We as a nation rely on the internet more than anybody else does. We rely on our infrastructure more than any other country does. We would be absolutely lost without electric power. And if that sounds like a silly statement, of course we'd be lost without it. If you think about us on the one hand and the North Koreans on the other, you knock out the electric system in North Korea, most people aren't even going to notice. Right? But the United States is vulnerable. We're more vulnerable than any other country out there, and we're not doing anything about preparing ourselves. General Alexander keeps talking about defending against that kind of an attack. If it can be done, hallelujah, I'm all with you. But until such time as we're able to defend against it, doesn't it make common sense that the nation should be taking actions to prepare itself for the aftermath of an attack like this? Doesn't it make sense? I'm sorry?
Part 3 of the book.
Yeah. Well, that's, you know, I make two simple points in my book about that. The one is there has to be enough food. If electricity is knocked out in 1/3 of the country, and you have 60 or 70 million people without electricity for a period of months, and it could be that long, you're going to need food. Government doesn't have it right now. It doesn't have it because the meal is ready to eat, have an expiration date of 5 years. So the government doesn't buy food for 20 or 30 or 50 million people for a period of 2 or 3 months. Freeze-dried food has an expiration date of 25 to 30 years. We could have the food ready in warehouses.
So what do you have in your pantry?
I
Do you have freeze-dried food and MREs?
I have a 2-month supply of freeze-dried food.
Okay.
And I made sure that all of my kids and grandkids have a 2-month supply of
I'm going to his house.
There you go.
All right, I wanted to change the subject slightly because we could talk about this for a long time. But, and I'm sure you've thought about this before, but Edward Snowden.
Who? Edward.
You know, my students and I have debates about what should happen with him and what he did and the value of what he did, and you were right in the middle of that. And now you've had some time to reflect. So, first of all, did what he exposed have a positive effect at all? And what is your view of what should happen to him?
So many things go through my mind. First,
What's the first one?
well, the first one is there's a great report by the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence that's out there that talks about the facts about Snowden, which is really pretty good. It talks about the fact that he started stealing information 8 months before he found anything to do with these special programs. So there's that part. The second part, this program that was revealed, it's interesting how short our attention span is. I have 16 grandchildren. I feel like at times we're talking to some of them. Remember, you're not supposed to do that. And in 2006, you may recall, there was a program on metadata. Right? Came out, got approved by Congress, is the same program that was divulged in 2013. My comment is, so what happened? Did everybody have kind of a mind wipe? And so there's that. The second is, in this case, what everybody was mad is that the president was doing something and it hadn't gone through all the courts and all the Congress, so they did that. It went through courts, Congress, the administration, and approved by everyone. That's the way we as a nation agreed to do it. All 3 parts of our government approved it because it made sense to protect us. It made sense to give the intelligence community, the military, and the law enforcement people the tools they needed that they didn't have to stop 9/11. And in my opinion, that was a good thing, and it remains today because Congress reenacted it with a couple changes. And the reason is, and it's interesting, the president, I can give you a great story on this, and
Okay.
The President's Review Group, so they tell me, they say, come down to the White House. So I go down to the White House, and I know they're going to talk about the President's Review Group. And you know it's not good when they're all sitting on one side of the table, you're sitting on the other. You think, this looks odd, this looks more like Congress. But they said, well, we're going to have a review group. I said, I know, I heard. We could get like Colin Powell, we could get, you know, Condoleezza Rice, we can get all these luminaries to see what we did and help tell the American people. And they said, well, we've already decided. And I said, wow. And so they slide these 5 names across the table, grabbed their fingers back so I couldn't get them. They were leery of me at that time. And I opened up the first one, and it was yada, 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 board member of the American Civil Liberties Union. I said, you've got to be
Well,
kidding me.
Mike Merrill was on that committee too.
Right. So, but let me keep going, because this guy who was on the ACLU, just to speed this up, saw what we were doing, and at the end changed from, you guys are the guys that are doing this, to, you're the best agency for protecting our civil liberties and privacy in government. And he and I went on to do, and that's Jeffrey Stone, board member of the ACLU, acting dean of the University of Chicago, helped teach President Obama, and one who did a joint op-ed with me in getting this renewed. And I asked him, why would you do that? And he said, because if we don't have tools like this and we get hit, we're not going to have civil liberties and privacy. So one, what Edward Snowden did, here's my real belief, I think he was steered, wittingly or unwittingly, by a foreign government. I think what he did...
Do you have information on that, or you're just...
I'm going to give you what I think. I have no proof.
And would that be Russia or someone else?
Well, it's interesting. You bring that up, Russia. It's a matter of, you're very good at this. In fact, so think about all the information that was revealed on every country. And it was revealed about what NSA is doing on Europe, what NSA is doing, what our government's doing all around the world. One country was missing, Russia. And I thought, darn, why doesn't NSA collect on Russia? And I thought, well, I've been here I thought, don't we do that, you guys? Now think about that. So, and you know, when he got to Russia, wasn't it Putin that said, I'm going to tell him not to talk, I'm not going to give him press, remember? And then all of a sudden you hear wah, 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 all the time on all the things. And who has been hurt the most? Us with our allies and everything that's going on. And if you go back and you look at the timelines for what he did, this is a guy who stole more than 1 million documents before he got to that document. And then revealed that along with all the rest, and has done more damage than any other person in history. As a consequence, he should come back here and face justice and then be incarcerated for multiple life terms. If he's found guilty, I mean. Of course, I wasn't there. But you know, so do I feel strongly about that? You betcha. You betcha. And the reason is that, you know, what really irritates me on this is the perception that the people of NSA who take this paltry government salary to protect this nation are made to look like they're doing something wrong when they're doing exactly what our nation has asked them to do to protect us. They're the heroes. They're the ones that deserve our praise. Not a guy who would take that, race to Hong Kong and to Moscow with our secrets that hurts our country, period. And so, what's wrong? Well, you talked about what's wrong with the tweets and what's wrong with fake news. What's wrong with a press system that makes a guy who's done something like that look right, but not one big story about Jeffrey Stone saying, hold it, what NSA is doing is the best in the world. Has anybody read that story here? No. It doesn't make the news because it doesn't sell. That's wrong. That's what's wrong with our system today. We are selling news to the American people to sell news, and it skews us just as bad as the Russians. We are our biggest problem. I know you should both shift it in your chair. This is not against you guys.
No, because I was...
But, you know, we are our own biggest enemy in this case.
So
I actually agree.
Oh, come on.
I do.
Okay. I disagree, and I think we can...
But that's why you're on that side.
That's why I'm on this side, and I was shifting a little bit because I could, as you know, there are people that don't agree with what you've said. Maybe one person.
Maybe
one person.
Two.
And the president's review mentioned some of the faults of the system and did criticize bulk collection, could not find an instance in which the bulk collection program had stopped a plot, which is what originally was used as a defense for the bulk collection program. And I know we could sit here forever and talk about that, but I did get your answer, and that's really actually what I wanted. But I also wanted to ask you if you would have the same answer. And I have to say one other thing, because you push the button, which is the button for the journalist is you do this to sell newspapers. Because as a journalist, that is never what I'm thinking, that I am writing a story in order to sell a newspaper. I'm writing a story to inform the public. And the fact that my boss makes money off of it never actually comes into my mind. And the reporters who did all the work on the Snowden documents absolutely believed they were doing a public service. So just putting it out there to know, for you to know that we don't,
some
not
of them
everybody
have
would
said,
agree with you.
After the fact, some of them have said privately to me that they made a mistake.
In doing what?
In what they reported.
The whole thing?
And these were guys that were very close to the center of that action. And so, and the other part is, why can't we get the whole truth out?
Meaning?
Meaning, so NSA was doing this. Not one person was found doing something wrong that they hadn't been authorized to do, that hadn't been reported. That these are people that are trying to save lives. There were cases that were pushed out that showed that these programs do support. Now, the issue is, how many tools do you need to connect the dots? How many tools do you need to connect the dots? And how much risk are you willing to take for American lives? And I think where President Bush and Congress were is 9/11 was too traumatic to go through again. But I interrupted.
But now we're going to go to Ted. Do you, and back on Snowden, and then we'll move to one other subject, and then we're going to open it up. But do you have the same view as General Alexander on Snowden? Okay.
No, I don't. I mean, I actually believe that Ed Snowden, I give him credit for better motives than you do. However, I come down on pretty much the same side of the issue. I think the threats to the United States now are so great that we have to come down on the side of those agencies that are defending, as we do in any other form of warfare. When we are in a declared war, and I grant you, this war has not been declared, I'm trying to sort of rile people up a little bit and say, folks, we're at war whether you know it or not, and you're not even entirely sure who our enemies are. But I come to the conclusion that Keith Alexander and the many men and women who worked for him are more on my side than the folks who are trying to do damage to the United States. And I'm not sure that we get very far in constantly, I'll tell you a very quick story about it, how incompetent these guys really are. When I was writing the book, when I was researching the book, I wanted to meet with General Alexander. He was generous with his time. We met. One day I got an email from his assistant, and she said, Mr. Koppel, would you please email me your phone number? General Alexander can't find it. I thought that was wonderful. That made me feel really good. I would have thought he knew every damn thing about me, but he couldn't even find my phone number. We live in very dangerous times. And I think we have become overly intoxicated with the manner in which we communicate. And when you talked a moment ago, Dana, about you're not thinking about the profit margin, you work for an extraordinarily wonderful organization. The Washington Post is one of the few truly great newspapers left, and the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. But by and large, journalism is deteriorating in this country, and it's deteriorating so quickly that I fear what's going to happen is that the progressives, the liberals, the folks on the other side of President-elect Trump and his people are going to be looking at what was done to their candidate using the internet and using hacking and using trolling and using information from a foreign government and say, hey, they did it to us. Our problem is we need to do it to them. And those of us who occupy the middle ground here, who really grew up believing that journalism is a calling, that it is something we were enormously proud of, our numbers are shrinking. The ability to do what you and I have been doing for most of our adult lives is shrinking. There are fewer and fewer out there. And frankly, I come to you as someone who really, I don't think that much of technology as a signpost, as a guide to where we should be going. The most memorable message that has ever been drafted and communicated in the history of man was put out on the least effective medium of communication ever devised, 2 tablets of stone. It is the message that survives. It is the message that has meaning or not. And what troubles me more than anything else is that the message these days is mostly drivel. And it's left only to a few organizations like your own and the Times and the Post and NPR and a couple of others who are still trying desperately to practice journalism. Journalism is going to hell in a handbasket.
Can I add one thing just to help Ted in the story? So you see, if we were really doing, I think, the job that we should to inform the American people about these two programs, most American people believe, based on the reporting, that NSA is listening to their phone calls and reading their emails, right?
I think so.
And that's not those programs.
No, you can't even get my number.
I couldn't get his number, so I can't listen to Ted. So there's one guy who's safe. And when you think about it, that's what people believe. And so you see politicians raising their phones up saying they're listening to your phone calls, they're reading your emails.
Yeah.
There's 300 million people. I don't even read my own daughter's emails to me. I hope this isn't public. So, when you look at that, we are so far off. So if our job in journalism is to inform the people, we kind of miss that. What we did is we enraged the people by the fact that they think we're listening to their phone calls and reading their emails. I've had people come up to me and say, "Are you reading my emails?" "I'm not reading your emails." "Are you listening to my phone calls?" "No, I'm sorry, I'm busy." But you see, we gave them that impression in the way it was reported across all the media. And so if we're doing our job, isn't it to inform the American people about what's actually happening so that they could make an informed decision? We didn't do that. And so when you say, is Edward Snowden a hero, the perception is we're listening to your emails or phone calls and reading your emails. But that's not what's happening. So if they understood what's happening, they'd say, that guy's a traitor. But we never gave them that. If we asked the audience here, those questions, what you'd find out, and this is an informed group, they are still, just as most Americans, confused on that topic because it was confused in the way it was reported. It was sensationalized and inflamed. It didn't inform.
But again, at the risk of being repetitive, Dana.
Say again?
The dangers we face in this country today, by virtue of the various fashions in which the internet can be used as a weapon, are so great that, as at any other time in war, a new set of rules needs to apply. I don't want to handcuff the NSA, not because I think they're all heroes and heroines, but because I think they're the only folks out there competent to really defend us.
What if they walk? What if the way we've treated them causes them to leave? And they're leaving in increasingly large numbers. That puts us at risk because we failed to do them justice. I am concerned about that. That's our future. That's our nation's protection. And we did it. We did it because we didn't tell the story.
Okay, I get to switch this. So we have two mics right here. If you'd like to come up and ask a question, and here's our first two. Well, hopefully someone will ask a question about this administration, the new administration, and whether they understand some of these issues. But for the moment, yes.
My name is Chris Dang. I'm a national security reporter with an organization called...
I don't think your mic is on yet.
Maybe there's a button.
Maybe you could
There's
just
a little button
speak
maybe
louder.
sometimes on the side.
There's a techie person in here.
It's fine.
Okay, no, just speak louder, yeah.
My name is Chris Dang. I'm a national security reporter with an organization called Thank you for this talk today. I'd like to ask you a few questions on some of the topics we covered and some of them that we didn't. General Alexander, you're familiar with what insider threats are, as we've talked about. There's a new face to that. His name is Harold Martin. It's an ongoing case, an individual who allegedly took troves of information countering insider threats and leak information, and what you're seeing now. There's a Washington Post article that came out, I believe, last month with regard to the opinion held by the Obama administration that the current sitting city director has not done enough to counter insider threats, and they use the example of Harold Martin as sort of a case of that. Second, I'd like to speak a little bit about the last thing that you talked about, which is retainment and attrition of the workforce. To my knowledge, as you mentioned as well, there's been there's been a larger number of very talented individuals leaving the NSA over the last year than in years past, especially those in highly technical positions like those involved with the unit known as TAO. Can you speak to that a little bit, confirm it, and perhaps how we can counter that, why it's occurring, and any other thoughts and opinions? Thank you.
So on the first, the insider threat is one of the biggest threats we face as we continue to put all this information together and you grow information. You can go out there, a video, Did You Know 2016, talks about the amount of unique information doubling every year. And so the intelligence agencies, not just NSA, face this insider threat. What this guy did, in part, was not necessarily to throw it out, but was taking it home and doing things with it, which was stupid, and there's a couple other things that are now going on. It's an active case of which I don't know all the details, but you are correct that the insider threat is a significant threat that we will face and we have to resolve. With respect to the workforce, this is where I think we, the press, and I'll put myself in this camp,
Wow.
because I'll work with Dana, that, you know, we need to help articulate why we have people at NSA and other places. And it is for, I believe, when I work with these folks, when they help save people, they would work through the night. I got a call from Mark Milley, who's the Chief of Staff of the Army, after I got out about the work that we did to help him find a big bomber on Christmas Day. There were several hundred people at NSA working to keep the people in Afghanistan safe. They remember that, they know they were good with it, and they could go home that night knowing that many of our people in Afghanistan were still alive because of their work. Those don't get published. Oftentimes they get no reward for doing their job, but it's what you bring up is...
The only thing with that, and I think that story is not told, but the public affairs office at the agency is not as forward-leaning.
That's for sure.
That's probably an understatement. So that's right. So we ought to push for that. I think where we can to have more transparency so the American people know exactly what's going on. That's a great point. And I think there's a new set of shows coming up called Declassified, and they ought to do more about that. I think, but you bring up a very good point, and you know, with your great MacBook there, and with what you're doing, one of the things is, so why don't we talk about what these folks are doing for the good of all of us? Yeah, there are a few people that didn't do good, and they should be held accountable. But
do you know if are people leaving because of NSA? You know, are they leaving to go to better corporate jobs that can pay them more? Or are they leaving because NSA is demoralized, or are they leaving?
I think it's a combination. My personal, it's a whole series of actions that each of these contribute to. Part of it is how the American people see them. Mm-hmm. And you know, it is not somebody who stands up and says what they're doing is good for our nation. You don't hear that. And if they're not told that, they're going home to their families and friends. They say, you work at NSA? Oh, are you listening to my phone calls?
But as you know, that's a function of how much you all will cooperate with the media. You have great stories to tell.
So we should work to do what's good for our nation.
So can you answer his question about the TAO? Are they also
well, I don't know today's numbers specifically, but I do hear that people are leaving increasingly in large numbers. And it's a combination of things that start from where we said to, of course, they're going to make a ton more money on the outside. You know, I am surprised that people with cyber experience in some of these large companies make up to 7 figures. Mm-hmm. That's 5 times what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs makes.
Right.
And this is a person with 32 years old. So you do the math. They are great mathematicians. They'll figure that out. Now, why would they stay? Everybody who helped on the Jessica Buchanan recovery, when they got done with that, they went home that night knowing they helped save her. That's a great thing.
Mark?
I'm going to take the bait that Dana just raised. I'm Mark Feldstein. I'm a Richard Eaton Professor of Broadcast Journalism. I'm briefly an ABC correspondent on Nightline with Ted Koppel. The Trump administration, do you know the new what do you think of Flynn, the new National Security Advisor, Pompeo, the new CIA Director, and Mattis, the new Defense Secretary, and what does their appointments suggest to you about what changes, if any, are going to occur in foreign policy?
Don't look over here. I think he was asking you.
Oh, me? Oh, I thought this, because Ted
Yes,
is much...
no.
General Alexander to start. You've been very good at ducking an awful lot of questions today. Maybe not on this one.
My question was
So
that
I'll start with what I do know. I do know Jim Mattis. I went to the National War College with him. We served together. He was a hero in Iraq at the division, at the 3-star, and at the 4-star level. He was at CENTCOM. He's exceptionally well-read, very bright, outspoken at times. And the thing I think we can take great comfort in his nomination is what the president-elect has chosen is somebody who will give him his unfettered advice. I think that's a good thing. He'll tell it like it is. I worked with Jim Mattis for a long time. Here's a guy who has unquestionable integrity and will tell the president-elect what he needs to hear, not what he wants to hear. I think that's great. I think it speaks good for our process. Mike Pompeo. He was a #1 in his class out of West Point in 1986. I think he's been 4 times elected to Congress. He sat on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He was one of the people that during the Snowden things that I use as a standard. When the press said 3 other members of Congress were asked this, did you know about this, did you know about it? Oh no, we're gonna go get those guys, we're gonna go find this out. He said, I knew about it, I'm on the committee, we authorized it, they're doing exactly what we asked, and the reporter's mouth was like, oh, next. So I gave him great kudos for standing up. He's a bright guy, he listens, he's a personal friend, as is Jim Mattis. I think those are great choices. I don't know Mike Flynn as well. Although he was an Army officer, he was several years behind me, and so I didn't work with him on all those. I saw him from afar. So I can't speak to his credentials as well. What you do see in the press, I think he was selected as the J2 out of the Joint Staff by Stan McChrystal, who I do know well, to be the intel officer in Afghanistan. And Stan McChrystal is one of the best war fighters I've ever met. And so he knew that Mike Flynn had some great credentials. I don't know all the stuff that's happened to him since he's got out. I've only met him once or twice after that. So trying to comment on that would be, I think from my perspective, more difficult.
Let me make it a little easier for you.
Thank you.
Or harder.
Or harder. Are you the interrogator?
No, but
okay.
Sometimes she needs a little help. When you talk about Mike Flynn as an active intelligence officer in the field, and that conforms to everything I've heard, brilliant. When he took over the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it was a managerial job, and the job he is going to take now at the White House, which is to be an honest broker as National Security Advisor for the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State and the CIA Director and all the other members of the cabinet. What I'm hearing is he is exactly the wrong man for that job, but I would like to hear your opinion.
I don't know, actually. I don't know the answer to that. You bring out some good points, but my experience in sitting in that room with the National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, Stephen Hadley, Jim Jones, Tom Donnellan, etc., Susan Rice. I worked with all of them. My experience is they bring the departments and agencies together. Each of them get to talk and tell the president what they think. So that's the person that orchestrates that process through the deputies and the principals committee. And my experience in that is this is something that, unless you've done it before, everybody goes in and learns. And I think that's what Mike is going to have to do. So he's bright enough to learn. The question I think that you put on the table is, will he listen? I think with folks like Jim Mattis, he will be heard. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, and you know, it was interesting. I only caught pieces of this morning's news cycle, but I know that Cheney was on too, saying tweeting is changing the way news is being made. And in fact it is, because there's a large number of people listening to it, and it comes back to your point. How do you get the facts out when there's so much churn in the media on both sides? So you've raised some great points, and I think, you know, this is the damned by what you're doing on this. They need to get that right. They need to learn from that on all sides.
Do you think it's their responsibility, though, when you clearly know that this has instigated a violent event, to take it upon themselves and say, you know, let's stop this now? And I'm particularly talking about Flynn and his son, because they are the ones with the big names now, the large number of followers who have not done that, even after a gunman walked in.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. You know, I really don't. I think what you're asking is hypothetical and correct, that they should learn from that. They should, I mean, if you ask me what's the correct behavior, it would be...
No, what I asked is if they are not telling their followers to stand down, this is not true, right. Do you think they should do that?
Well, I think they should, one, I think we all should be as transparent, and we must be truthful and put that out there. I don't know what he believes or what information he's got, and I don't know all the stuff about Pizzagate. I do eat pizza though. But I can tell you this, that I look at what's going on in our country, from Black Lives Matter to all the things with law enforcement to the way we have these things, and we all owe a responsibility to figure out how do we solve some of these issues. And what you're hitting on is what they're doing is not solving, it's inflaming them. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't do that. And yes, they have a level of responsibility, but I don't know all the facts that went into it. You remember, I'm a tech guy. Now, having said that, I would agree that we have a moral and ethical responsibility to not incite, but to help protect our nation. I think as those folks going in there, they're deal with. And he's got to learn from it.
Can we?
Yeah, I just wanted to continue on the same theme, really. The president-elect has sort of shown willingness to tweet out fairly baseless stuff. He seemed very skeptical during the campaign about the intelligence community's conclusion that it was Russia behind the hacking. I just wonder if you were his NSA director, would that be concerning, that you're generating all this useful information to him, potentially, that he's just going to ignore or not listen to?
I'm not sure I could hear or understand.
Well, he was pointing out the fact that Trump disparaged the IC, the intelligence community, several times as a candidate, and then has not taken briefings by them. And does that concern you? Right. Correct? Yeah.
Well, I think, it's interesting. Somebody pointed out in the press this morning, he's not the president yet. We have a sitting president who's responsible for protecting this country up until January. I do think as he gets closer to that, and I don't know what Mike Flynn is taking to give to him and how that whole process is going. I do think he needs people around him that can give him good advice on these issues. I think on the other part, there's so much going on with this election. It's interesting to look at how this election occurred, what went on with it, and where we are. there are some opportunities. And I think the one thing that we could all agree on is one, Donald Trump's going to be our president. How can we help do the right things for our nation? How do we help do that? And, you know, from my perspective, I think getting him the right and best advisors, that one of the earlier questions, is part one. And two is we have to help weigh in. So press can be very useful on that. And by laying out these approach and the strategy. And yep, there's going to be a lot of pushback, and I know that the press has already been taken to the woodshed, so to speak. If you can't.
So what's new?
Yeah, so it's new.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Keith Marzullo. I'm the Dean of the College of Information Studies. I want to stretch the argument a little bit, if it's okay. We've been talking about national security, but many of the things you've been talking about brush on privacy. Privacy and security are related but different ideas. And this administration, I think, has done a good job in trying to raise the bar on privacy. Perhaps as a consequence, but nonetheless, they've done that. Office of Management and Budget, for example, has done on this. The Office of Science Technology Policy has issued a new research and development strategy for privacy. And I honestly think there's more of a risk with industry than with the government in terms of privacy. But I'm wondering again, if you're giving recommendations to the incoming administration, what should this administration do in respect to privacy, in terms of what it should be forwarding, what it should be funding, what it should be doing?
I again think that was
It's
probably
just to me.
addressed to you.
I thought it was to
And
Ted.
then,
Well, you know, I think first, one of the things that we spend a lot of time when I was at NSA is training people how to handle U.S. persons data in a responsible manner. And on these programs, anybody who worked those programs had 400 hours of training, and if they made a mistake, they had to redo it. And that's why there were so few mistakes made with this. And I think that's a very good thing, and that's one of the things that the review group found. I think government at large has to do that. I think we have to look at how do we do privacy and continue that and secure this nation. One of the fallacies, and Ted brought this up, is that sharing threat information has nothing to do with personally identifiable information. So the fact that a Russian hacker is attacking your network has nothing to do with any of our privacy and should be shared, and we should agree to that. So we should say, where do we agree, and then where do we have concerns? The biggest concern is going to be about encryption and where we need a national debate. How do we handle encryption when it gets to a point where the law enforcement and the intelligence community can't see what's going on? So the New York City subway plot was solved by these programs, both of them, because NSA could read that email and provide that information to the FBI. If they couldn't have, it wouldn't have been stopped, and that would have been the biggest attack on US soil since 9/11. So these are issues that we should discuss. I am an advocate for privacy. I am an advocate for security, and I believe we can do both. It's a little bit harder. The people at NSA and the rest of the intel community have to do more work. Not one of them ever complained to me about doing that. And when we made a mistake, we reported it to Congress, the courts, and the administration. So I think one of the things, you know, the ironies here is, at least where I came from, they did that very well. That, I do not believe that culture will change. I think they will continue to do that work because that's what we train them to do. Now the issue is going to be, so what does our nation do, and what do other nations do to get visibility of terrorist acts? How are we going to handle it? That's an issue that we're going to face. You know, there's some big issues coming up in the Middle East with respect to Egypt, Syria, collapse of states. If this happens, the amount of immigration into Europe and potentially the United States is going to be huge. And terrorism is going to be very big in Europe and the United States. We've got a problem. So I think we should think very carefully about how to solve that. You know, one of the things that I push for now is I would bring Jeffrey Stone onto some of these things because he balances both. I found if an Army officer, me, fairly conservative, and a board member of the ACLU can agree on a path forward for our nation, then there's hope for all of us. And that's really what we need to do, is you bring two people like that together and say, come up with a solution that we know you guys have thought through that is good for our country.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So, yes, please come forward.
My name is Tim Summers. I'm actually in the College of Information Studies as well, and I'm a hacker, and I actually used to be an employee for the General, so this conversation has kind of intersected my life in a lot of different ways. I'm curious from all of your perspectives, what your thoughts are about the vulnerabilities equities programs that we have within the intelligence community.
The vulnerabilities?
Equities?
Equities.
So first, thanks for your service. The equities program, we spent a lot of time balancing equities between, you probably know both these, Debbie Plunkett and Teresa Shea.
Do you want to...
So Debbie Plunkett was responsible for the information assurance. Debbie did the information assurance directorate, responsible for defending. Teresa was on the offensive collection side. And what we did is we made an agreement early on. We would err in the defense of the nation and put it out like that, and we did. And if we didn't put it out, we'd put a capability to say, and if this is ever found, we would put it out so that the nation was protected. And we stuck to that the whole time. It made your job harder, but it was the right thing for the country. And we worked with everybody to do that. And we put out more than 90+% of all those things that we saw. Some people criticized it, but nobody changed it, because I think at the end of the day, they saw that's the right thing to do. And we discussed it, and we looked at all the different things. I think that's a right thing. So you know from having sat in some of those chairs that, yeah, it made your job tougher. But we got great people. You know that. These are really good people. And so I think keep raising that bar. Protect this nation. Protect our allies. Makes our job tougher, but it makes it tougher for the adversary too. And that's what we should do.
So I'm going to end with a question directed to the university and to university students, actually. Let's not talk about the technical capabilities, because I think that we have great departments in that area. But in terms of cybersecurity in the non-technical areas, is there a place for students to become better communicators, better, I don't know. What do you think cybersecurity, the field, needs that is not a technical field, expertise rather, or is there?
All right, let me take a crack at that. We are currently being fed, when I say we, I mean the American people, are being fed some real nonsense about what journalism is. What is being sold is the seductive proposition that in a democracy, anyone can be a journalist. And it's true. We don't have to have licenses. We don't have to pass an exam. There really is no formal standard that has ever been set for journalism. It's sort of been taken care of by these different organizations that Dana and I have worked for over the years. We have worked with good editors and good producers and people who make sure that we follow certain standards of collecting and sifting and editing material so that by the time we put it out, it's not the truth necessarily, but at least it is factual. And the truth, the proverbs say, is the daughter of time. Now we live in an age in which we're being sold the proposition that anyone has a right to be a journalist, and unlike years past where you had to join an organization like the Washington Post or ABC or NBC or CBS or NPR. These days, you can just do it with your own laptop. And no one is applying any standards of accuracy, let alone truth, to what is being put out there. And if anything can undermine the capability of our democracy to survive, it is the notion that journalism can be practiced by anybody without any set of standards, without any rules, and without regard to how many people are hurt by lies that are being put out. And I'm really addressing these comments to whoever among you here are from the School of Journalism. You're going to fight an uphill fight. But the notion that journalism requires real standards, even ethics, is not something that should be given up so easily. And I'm afraid we're on the verge of doing that. The notion that anybody with a laptop can be a journalist is simply pernicious. It's dangerous. Journalism requires editing. Journalism requires checking sources. Journalism requires, usually, working in collaboration with other professionals who are going to make sure that what you put out is as close to being accurate as it can be. And we're drifting further and further away from that every day.
So I'll just add to what Ted said on the cybersecurity part. Hugely technical. And the biggest problem I see is people don't understand it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that those of you who aren't technical can really help do is explain. Explain what's happening so the American people understand what choices we have and the right path that we have to help secure this country. And it gets to things, and I think some of these questions were very good about privacy, about other things along that way. What you really want to do then is to say, okay, so how do we do this? What's the best next step for this country? And I think what you can do is help inform that discussion with the facts.
If I can just say thank you, Professor Priest. Thank you, Ted Koppel. Thank you, Major Alexander. For those of you who were invited to the reception in Knight Hall, go out the door and go toward the football stadium, and you will see the courtyard, this big glassed atrium in there. And we'll see you over there in a few minutes. Thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause?